In July 2014, we embarked on an adventure that would remain with us for a lifetime. This adventure to cross one of the oldest continents in the world was much more than a big motorbike ride or some trip into the outback. It was about the search of finding true brotherhood and teamwork. It was about pushing the boundaries and the challenges that city life robs us of. In this film, I hope to take you on a journey as we follow the footsteps of Burke and Wills, crossing more than 7,000 kilometres through the heart of Australia. Watch as we ride together, laugh together, break down together, as we endeavour to see the same places as the explorers did in 1860. Welcome to the Burke and Wills Adventure of 2014. In 1860, Robert O'Hara Burke and William John Wills led 19 men across Australia, from Royal Park, Melbourne in Victoria, to the Gulf of Carpentaria in the north of Queensland, a distance of 3,250 kilometres or 2,000 miles. Australia's inland hadn't been explored by European settlers in this period of Australia's history. Now, some will say that it was poor leadership and bad luck that this expedition cost 7 lives and was a complete failure. Others believe it was one of the most successful adventures ever taken in Australia's young history since settlement. That against all the odds, this journey was a complete success, even with the cost of so many lives. Whatever your thoughts may be on the 1860 expedition led by Burke, it would be fair to say it remained one of the most important events in Australia's past. Taking on a country as vast as Australia, with so little known about what awaited for them each and every day of their journey, must have taken great courage. I've always been interested in the story of Burke and Wills, and more so the hardship and the struggles of their adventure. So it was my intention to follow their historic journey across Australia in search of a better understanding of their adventure. And for me, the adventure started right here. I had been reading this book when I retired from the military because I was always fascinated with Burke and Wills and their remarkable story. Now, I wanted to give myself a present on retirement, and that present was to follow the footsteps of Burke and Wills. My wife's plan was for me to buy a small four-wheel drive and go down to Royal Park, Melbourne, and drive from that departure point where Burke and Wills had left in 1860 and make my way to the north in Queensland's Gulf country, which is where they were aiming for. That was the plan. However, I decided I wanted to change that plan a little bit and not use a car. Much to the worry of my wife, I decided to go back to what I knew. I stuck with the military and I got myself a military bike, then I got 2, and then I ended up with 5. And this is the story behind that part, the preparation of our journey. Here I am preparing one of the motorbikes for the adventure. I own 4 of these bikes. They're Yamahas from 1991, all ex-military reconnaissance motorbikes. And in hindsight, I realised that I had more time to prepare for my journey as Burke and Wills did back in 1860. We had to whip 4 bikes into shape and get them ready. My bike began life as a wreck in the back of a friend's house, but I brought it back to life and it made the entire journey. But definitely the jewel in the crown is this, my website. It had 22,000 hits in 1 month when I put it on Avid Rider. People from all over the world wanted to join the Burke and Wills trip. This particular website was important because my riders were all over Australia and they were flying into Melbourne, so they needed up-to-date information day by day, map information, packing information, and this woman in the picture here on my website has absolutely no relevance to the ride. I just put it on there because she's cute. They say knowledge is everything, and like everything, information is power.
and I'm grateful to the Townsville Restored Motorcycle Club and its many members who helped advise me over the 2 years of preparation. This group of very experienced riders helped me not only with the technical knowledge on my bikes, but also the details in my planning that I could never have thought of myself. This is just as much their adventure as it was mine.
You know, like any great adventure, selecting your team is the most important thing. And I didn't want to make the errors that Burke had made back in 1860. I knew the people I was travelling with, I had served with them, and I had been in places with them. These were people that dated back 25 years in another life of mine. So they were important members to select. From Samantha, who came along and looked after the money, and was one of the most experienced riders because she'd grown up riding motorbikes on farms, which never seemed to have any brakes. And didn't that turn out to be a success for us, because the bike she had constantly had failed brakes. Then we had Phil. Phil was very important. Although I haven't served with Phil, Phil is a young man serving in the military today and comes to my house all the time. When he had heard about the Burke and Wills Adventure, he was actually the biggest fan, probably more passionate about it than I was. And then there was Christopher. Christopher, of course, is married to Samantha. I had served with Christopher 20 years ago at a radar squadron. A very important man to have on board. Not only is he a technician and understands electronics, he understands motors. He builds race cars, for goodness sake. So having Chris on board was a great asset. And last but certainly not least was the man of the hour as far as I'm concerned, Dave.
I first served with Dave in the 1990s. We both discharged from the armed forces in the same week after both having served more than 2 decades in uniform. And I think he was just as lost as I was when we both became civilians. We made a point of catching up every few months for lunch, and in 2013 I told him of my planned adventure. It was at that moment that I asked him to lead my team of riders, and his answer was immediate and with purpose. He said yes, and I expected nothing less from this man. Finally, the team was fully selected and we were ready to go. 3 weeks before the adventure would begin, Phil took his fully prepared bike off to Sydney ahead of us completely on his own. The next time that I would see Phil would be in Melbourne, and that seemed so far away. As I watched Phil ride off, I remember something someone once said to me. A goodbye isn't painful unless you never go to say hello again. And I plan to see my mate again in just a few weeks. And the bikes, now fully prepared and ready, were just awaiting to be loaded on our transport and for us to make our epic first part of our journey from Townsville to Melbourne.
Well, here we are. We're in the final stages of departure. We've probably got about 10 more minutes to go and we're on the road. Dave over here is just hitching up the last bits for the trailer, and then we're good to go. At this point, I think we're going to head out for a place called Torrens Creek, and that's where our bitumen's going to end, and then we're going to hit the true outback, and I hope to be able to show you something. Come with us for a ride.
As hard as it was for all of us to believe, we were finally heading south with all our equipment safely loaded on our recovery vehicle. Dave and I had no idea what our first day on the road would hold for us, but we were keen to find out. If you've never been to the true outback, then you haven't seen the real Australia. No words in a documentary can truly capture what Australia has to show you, and I find it pointless to try and express those images in words. We didn't do too much talking on that first day, as Dave and I were just busy taking in the country that we had come to love. We really are lucky to call Australia home, and at the risk of sounding arrogant, I really think Queensland has everything an explorer could ever hope to see. It may seem like it's miles and miles of nothing out here, but nothing could be further from the truth. There is something about an open highway that calls to our souls. It's a sense of freedom and adventure with every tree that you pass and with every corner that you turn. Throughout the drive on that first day, we stopped every hour to check the trailer that was carrying the bikes and equipment, and all seemed to be running perfectly well. As far as I was concerned, everything was going to plan and there was nothing at all to worry about. But Dave, who had so much more experience than me, was less confident, and he was constantly listening out for those odd noises. Many of the roads that we were travelling on was just corrugated, outback dirt, and that takes its toll on all things that cross it. But I kept telling him to relax, because everything as far as I was concerned was fine. But the truth is, I couldn't have been more wrong. Dave, what's happened?
Well, we stopped for a cold drink break. This lovely rest spot, which almost became our home, and still could. And George was singing the praises of the trailer and talking about its mystical qualities and how good it will be when we get back to Townsville. And I don't know why, but something said, Dave, look underneath the trailer. So I did. And on the left-hand side of the axle, I look at the spring shackle and the axle and go, that don't look right. I look across on the other side and I see a full complement of U-bolts, and about the midway point of the axle I find this. One bolt, one U-bolt completely missing, and for some reason the axle is still hanging on the springs.
So what should have happened? What, in a worst case scenario, what should have happened? Point and show me.
That should have detached from the axle, come back and hit the mudguard, possibly torn the mudguard off, rip the whole axle off, and we'd be axle-less, trailer-less, or this come back to here and the trailer get head off in one direction and...
So huge disaster.
Potentially.
It would have been a showstopper, wouldn't it?
Potentially. It wouldn't have been good.
From that moment on, everything changed, as both Dave and I knew that every bump on the road, every pothole in the bitumen, and just one more corrugated dirt highway would end the adventure before it even started. So we drove at 45 kilometres from that point on, and that gave us time to enjoy our first sunset, and it was truly spectacular, to say the least. We would often stop on the side of the road and check the trailer of doom, as Dave called it, and by some miracle, the axle was still on its springs. The beauty of an outback sunset leaves you speechless, and never before had I seen so many colours in the evening sky. And it had a hypnotic effect on me, and it took away all the stress that I was feeling from earlier on in the afternoon. This was truly an amazing sight. The next morning we woke to find ourselves camped next to a cemetery in the Queensland country town of Burke. Bloody hell, we were miles away from home, and it was a cold winter morning in the outback. This is the very town where the Australian Labor Party can trace its roots to back in 1891, the same year that the shearers took a stand and went on strike. This town is one of the toughest towns in all of Australia, and their strength was forged when union and non-union shearers decided to have it out over pay and conditions. But the good old government of the day sent 1,000 armed soldiers and 300 scab labourers to keep the wool flowing, and after police arrested many of the strikers and put them in jail, the strike ended, but a new era was born, and the union would later come of age and get its own back. But history of this town was the last thing on our mind as we were searching desperately to find parts for our trailer of doom. Failure to do so would mean the trip would have to end for us right here, as driving at 45 kilometres an hour to Melbourne would take us 11 days at this rate, and we needed to be in Melbourne in 48 hours.
We're in business.
You got them, mate?
Yes.
Oh, mate, that's fantastic. So let's have a look at it, mate. Pesky bastard. Is that all that's been costing us all this time?
That's it. Those little mofo esters.
All right, let's put them on. I felt really guilty watching Dave go through all this trouble, and it was costing us so much time. And the reason is, he had actually warned me just a month before to make sure that the suspension on the trailer of doom had been checked. See, the reality, they were rusty, and those bolts didn't look right from the beginning. But Dave kept his cool and never said a thing to me. He'd just gone on with the job so we could move that trailer and head south and make our rendezvous in Melbourne.
Well, it's the morning of day 2, and we're moving along quite well. We have fixed the trailer, and thankfully all that's sorted out and well and truly behind us. Today is a new day, and a very special day. See, Dave over here has decided that he'd like to join us on the motorcycles, throughout our big journey. Wants to be able to jump out of the vehicle and have a go at riding the motorbikes as we cross the desert. There's one problem. Dave has never held a license, but because Dave is a bit of a Ronnie Raff, and for those of you guys who have never heard that saying, it means he sort of follows the rules because there's a bit of a square. He knew that he had to get a driver's license. So that presented a whole bunch of problems for us.
Dave and I decided to make the best of the situation since we were sitting in the vehicle doing very little other than driving, and study for his exam that he would be having in just a few short hours when we came to the next town. And I must say, it was a great deal of fun.
And they should be wearing matching jackets because it looks so much cooler.
And Bluetooth comms so you can chat about the sexy girls that are driving the car next to you,
Absolutely. Did you see the knockers on that one?
That's it. All right.
Well, eat your heart out.
How'd you go?
One retarded question wrong.
So that's it, you're a motorbike rider?
Yeah, I'm a fully fledged bloody bandito kicker-asser.
Well done, mate. Congratulations. Let's hope you have many years of enjoyment.
All right, let's keep it upright.
All right. With his learner permit now in his hands, Dave again took the wheel, and late into the night we crossed the border of New South Wales. We camped by the side of the road that night, and it was so much colder than the night before. While it was still dark, Dave and I broke camp, and after a quick check of the engine, we hit the road again, anticipating another beautiful day of great scenery. The miles seemed to roll on forever, but we never got bored of seeing another farm or a mountain or another river crossing. As cold as it was, I was dying to step out of the car and take it all in.
I'm somewhere in the back country of New South Wales, and let me tell you, it's absolutely beautiful out here, but it's very, very cold, and I just want to get inside the vehicle and warm up. There's a lot of sheep on the road, there's been a lot of goats on the road. Anyway, I'm going to get in this vehicle because this is my ride coming up right now. Oh shit, he's left me! I'm freezing, Dave, I'm freezing!
I couldn't believe that we were now well and truly inside New South Wales. July is winter in this part of the world, and temperature outside was just 5 degrees Celsius. We would spend the whole day driving with the purpose of reaching Melbourne by nightfall. This meant staying warm in the cab and only stepping out to fill up the car. But this didn't bother Dave and myself, as seeing the farmlands of country New South Wales was like viewing a postcard. I'd always dreamed of living out in a place like this, and I couldn't help but think of a poem that the famous Banjo Paterson wrote called Clancy of the Overflow, and in particular one memorable part that went something like this. And I'd somehow rather fancy that I'd like to change with Clancy. I'd like to take a turn at droving where the seasons come and go, while he faced the round eternal of the cash book and the journal, but I doubt he'd suit the office, Clancy of the Overflow. What a journey it was so far. During our 2,600 kilometre drive, Dave was at the wheel the whole time, and the fatigue was starting to show on his face. We hadn't got word back from Phil yet, who had gone to Sydney and was supposed to be departing for Melbourne on this very day, and it was worrying us because we hadn't seen him or heard from him in 1 week.
Well, it's hard to believe, but after 2.5 days of driving, here we are in the beautiful city of Melbourne. I've never seen so many lights and I've never seen so much traffic. Isn't it fantastic?
When we finally drove into the city of Melbourne, it was like driving through a series of rolling fireworks with all the bright lights and huge buildings in every direction you turn. And I started thinking about some of the really famous people that were born here, like Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, who I always thought was born in Queensland. And then there was Kylie Minogue and Rupert Murdoch and Kate Blanchett and Eric Bana, just to name a few. Now look at the traffic, it's crazy even at 7 p.m. And if the traffic wasn't enough to contend with, there was also these tram tracks that were constantly under our wheels that were freaking me and Dave out. We were worried because we thought we might have been in the wrong lane, but it turns out Victorian drivers only drive well when they're in the wrong bloody lane. If there's ever a time that I was missing Queensland, where it's beautiful one day and perfect the next, it was right here and now as I was driving in this absolutely crazy city of Melbourne.
What's going on, brother?
You know what? In the last sort of 5 minutes as we were looking for the Diamonds home where we're staying, this is base camp for the next 3 days, I get a phone call. And it's none other than Phil, our co-rider, who left Sydney this morning. Now, if you remember from my other video, Phil left Townsville about 3 weeks ago because he was going to ride to Sydney, fly off to New York, come back to Sydney. After a day's rest, he was then going to ride all the way down to Melbourne. Now, unfortunately, we've had cold rain, the worst conditions of all. We actually rode him off. Me and Dave thought that there was no way Phil was going to make it here to Melbourne tonight. He got here before us and was waiting for us. A few minutes ago, my good friend Phil, our cook, has shown up, man. Good to see you, man. Good to see you.
I can't tell you how relieved Dave and I were to know that Phil, our youngest rider, who we hadn't heard from in over a week, was now back in our company after riding all day in the winter rain. We didn't stop and think about how the cold would have affected Phil's health, but it would, and it would threaten his chance to join us in the days to follow when we departed on our epic journey on the Burke and Wills Adventure. We decided that we would not sleep in the home of our host, preferring the open-air garage, as it was vital that we started to adapt to the cold winter right here and now, as it would be too late when we hit the desert where the temperatures would be below zero. Our philosophy was simple. If it was too cold here and now, then do something about it while we're still in a city and able to get warm.
Phil, how did you pull up from the sleep last night, mate? Were you well rested?
Yeah, very well rested. I think it was a long, hard day and a well-deserved sleep. I wimped out.
Phil has a history of pneumonia, and he told me that it's triggered by 3 things: lack of sleep, stress, and the cold. When he gets sick, he gets hospitalised for up to 2 weeks at a go, and just 48 hours earlier, he'd landed in Australia, back from his trip in the US. so he's tired. He then went on to ride in a wet winter's day for 11 hours from Sydney to Melbourne yesterday. The signs were there that our youngest rider was already starting to become ill. If that wasn't bad enough, Dave was going downhill fast from the bitter cold and he'd need medication. Once again, the real threat of delay, or worse still, the scrapping of our adventure, began to loom over us. With a few hours to kill that first cold morning in Melbourne until Chris and Samantha flew in from Darwin, Dave gave the order to do a thorough stock take of all our equipment and spares. Crossing the continent was a serious business, and we had to consider the spare parts and the tools to keep 4 motorbikes going that were already 23 years old. So everything needed to be packed and carried the whole way, just like we used to do when we served in the Defence Force. Now look at me here. Look at me strutting around the house while Phil is outside doing all the hard work with Dave. Clearly I hadn't learnt my lesson from the Trailer of Doom incident, and it all seemed like a funny joke to me. But don't worry, I'd be having my reality check soon enough. In no time flat, we heard the sound of a cab arrive, and out jumped Sam and Chris. After 2 long years of planning, we were all finally together.
Chris, how are you going, buddy? Here they are.
Hey, this is very unlike the weather at home.
Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you, mate.
Sam, Sarah, nervous as all. Good to see you. Good to see you, Sammy.
Hi.
You remember Dave? You met? Oh, Sam, how was your flight?
It was one of
Jetstar.
those jet stars where the seats don't recline.
Oh, is that right?
So we were up like this one.
Well, guys, you're in good company now. You'll be fine. Just check all your gear.
Got it all?
You guys are
The team's complete.
Good on you guys.
Now, in case you know little about us defence guys, let me make it simple for you. Although we all have a boss that we answer to, each and every member is a kind of boss or specialist in their given area. That means when something is in their area of expertise, they have the final say. Now, Dave is the overall leader of this team and he has the last say. But when it comes to the bikes and all mechanical and electrical issues to do with the bikes and the recovery vehicle, that belongs to Chris. So although these bikes are owned by me, the moment Chris got here, they became his property, and all matters and decisions regarding the maintenance and upkeep of these vehicles are now on his terms and his terms alone. And it makes good sense to delegate areas of responsibility, because then each member owns their little bit of the puzzle. With the team all under one roof, it was time for those dreaded briefings that we've all come to love and hate. This is when everyone gets to share that little bit of their puzzle to make that big picture that we can all see. From this point on, Dave would split the team up as we headed off into Melbourne to resupply our expedition with all the goodies that we'd need for the next 14 days. Phil was in charge of meals, so he was dropped off with Samantha to purchase all the stock needed for the 2 weeks in the outback, while Dave and I visited various hardware stores in search of camping goods needed to make life comfortable. After all, we were all ex-Air Force and we'd miss things like percolated coffee in the morning, or a pop-up heated swimming pool, a mobile kitchen complete with a dishwasher, a flat screen TV with cable on the go as we call it, and in no time flat we had more unnecessary crap than we could use. Pretty much like Mr. Burke's manifest in 1860 that was 80% useless heavy junk that his expedition wouldn't need. And once again, the drivers of Victoria proved to be the worst in Australia by constantly cutting us off or boxing us in.
Look at that, she just snuck in, didn't she? She's like, yeah, I got Queensland plates, I'm a Victorian, I know you're scared of my driving, so I'll just drive in front of you.
It says the ballet lessons and we run away.
Yeah, all white Tarago drivers are just the worst drivers of all.
When my wife viewed this documentary, she got the shits with me. because she drives a white Tarago.